Hello, guys and gals. Me, Mudahar. I have to ask you guys an honest question in the comment section below. Are any of you guys watching like mobsters, terrorists, criminals? Are any of you guys like people that have like something serious, something criminal to hide? Is anybody watching this video? Tony Soprano? Is anybody watching this video like, Osama bin Laden or something? I'm going to wager that the amount of people watching this, just law of numbers wise, not a whole lot of people are actually criminals. But I'm going to ask you a question actually after this. Do you still want to be private? Do you still want to communicate to somebody and not have people looking into your conversations? I think a vast majority of people watching this video enjoy their privacy. And the reason why I started this video off that intensely is because I actually do think that we're on the final verge. And I've been saying this for months, but it's gotten really bad to the point where it seems like more and more of these insane age restrictions are passing. It's actually getting to a point where it's so bad that, like I was telling you guys months ago, I think by the end of this year, the internet as we know it is going to be vastly different. In fact, just the ways we communicate to each other, the amount of mass surveillance on us is going to change to a point that it's irreversible and it's going to peek into every aspect of our life. Now, I don't know about you guys, but I'm a Canuck. I live in Canada. I've lived in Canada almost my entire fucking life, okay? I'm an immigrant. When I came over, basically like a month or two old. So yeah, technically I am from the old country, okay? I'm from the old Indian side of the world. But I've spent basically all of my life as a Canadian person. And in my country, if you look at the politics of my nation, we're a very left-wing country. The Liberals are super duper liberal. In fact, the most right-wing Canadian party are basically just a bunch of lip-tard by American terms. Anyways, though, I'm not here to talk necessarily about the politics. I'm here to talk about what's actually coming. So there's been a new favor in restrictions, and actually it seems as though that the party that kind of runs Canada, and for the most part, this would basically be any party, because when we talk about age restrictions and mass surveillance, it's actually something that both sides are totally okay with, okay? You want to talk about, are the people who prefer smaller governments okay? I mean, in America, you had the party of small government pass shit like the Patriot Act because they wanted to stop things like terrorism in their country. So it's bad all over. But anyways, in Canada, what's kind of been happening is there have been resolutions, and the framework for this is being set for months, by the way, years even, where the minimum age of 16 for creating social media accounts is going to be a pretty real thing. In fact, it's not just social media accounts. According to the government, all AI chatbots and other forms of AI interaction are going to be thrown in. Now, you probably heard about the wild stories of people who converse with chatbots who end up going through actual AI psychosis, and I don't mean to downplay this. There's been cases of minors who've ended up taking their own lives, yes, actually ending their own lives, because an AI chatbot basically convinced them to. And in some cases, the company behind the chatbot is like, well, we didn't know any fucking better. It's supposed to be an entertainment tool. Ha 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 ha. There have been cases where prominent individuals have murdered their moms, okay? Actually killed parents, actually killed other human beings because an AI told them to. And the AI company involved is like, well, that wasn't supposed to happen. Sometimes it does. It's a little quirky bug in the system. So through a lot of factors, there have been actual legitimate reasons for people to look at social media and look at a lot of this AI stuff and think, maybe we should put a fucking age restriction. Maybe we should put a stop on it. And to an extent, I'm not going to sit here and say it's entirely unwarranted, because that would just be very unfair to the nuance of the topic, right? Look, when I go to a bar, they ask for an ID. I mean, they haven't asked for an ID in a long time, ever since I got one of these. The IDs have basically been non-existent. I guess I look old enough that, beyond 21, I can order me a good old Jack and Coke. But, you go to a gas station, you ask them for a pack of ciggies, and they're like, shit, here you go, that'll be $21. Not an ID asked. But, they do, right? Because the minimum age, at least in Canada, is 19, 18 if you're in the French side, and 21 if you're in the United States. And generally in these parts of the world, they'll ask you for an ID when the person feels that you're kind of on that line, when you're teetering on the edge. So, yeah, I think in a lot of ways, when a bartender asks me to produce my driver's license, the bartender is not scanning my driver's license, putting that shit into a fucking registry, and walking away with it. You know, one time in the United States, there was a situation where I went to buy pot in the state of California. They were like, sir, do you want to make a profile here? I'm like, actually, no. Can I just pay you in fucking cash? And they were like, no, you need to put you in a profile. And I'm like, no, I don't like pot that much to be fucking putting the lists for it. So I understand the reality, right? I mean, obviously, you can't just give kids access to booze, tobacco, and all this crazy shit, right? You know, you want to walk into like a club that's for 18 plus, they're going to ask you for an ID. So why shouldn't the same exist for a social media service? The reality is, to an extent, I guess some could say, yeah, it probably should have some limitations. Unfortunately, the internet is a place where the only way to, I guess, kind of do that, at least anybody can figure out, is to take a government piece of ID, put it through a database, and start logging each and every account. Now, obviously, I've explained the mass surveillance implications there, and I don't fucking agree with it. For anybody. I think if you're an adult and you're buying your kid an iPhone, okay, because remember, if the government considers using this to access Facebook as the same level of harm as, say, something like a cigarette or a fucking bottle of Jack Daniels, then maybe, just maybe, when you buy one of these phones, they should ask you for the ID at the fucking store right there. Hey, you need to be over 18 to purchase a cell phone, okay? Because this shit can be used to access some pretty spooky stuff on the internet. If you're a parent that buys your kid access to a fucking iPhone, I think at a level, if you're just giving your kids access to a phone and letting them scroll endlessly through TikTok and whatnot, almost called 911 by mistake, you should be fined, charged with child neglect, okay? If that's the case. See, the problem with a lot of these fucking dog shit laws is the only way to enforce them is to build that registry. And when you build that registry, it's just a bad situation because generally you're basically putting your ID and you're attaching it to every social media service you use, every search engine you use. And now when they talk about AI chatbots, a lot of people, instead of using Google, are now using ChatGPT to do every fucking search imaginable. Well, just accessing ChatGPT to do your searches now, if you're not over the age of 18, may limit your experience to actually accessing information that the government can just blindly set and arbitrarily say, yeah, that's not for minors, okay? That information is not for minors. So it started off with like governments banning like porn websites and everyone was like, oh, that's fucking cool. But then it evolves to any social media site, any avenue of sharing information. So it makes you kind of wonder, it's like what the ultimate goal of this is, whether it's to censor people or just to mass surveil them, because it sure as fuck isn't about protecting the children. If it was about protecting the children, the Epstein class would actually suffer some fucking jail time and start to be investigated seriously by any of these countries. Now, when I was looking at places like Idaho, they implemented they brought in new laws that actually did prevent things like digital ID from being utilized by a government entity. So this is actually bill number 1299, and you can actually see when they talk about this, government purposes and government entities, basically a physical, non-digital ID will always be required. Now, here's the reason why this bill sounds really nice, because yes, they do talk about, hey, the government isn't going to be requiring you to produce digital IDs. But they didn't say anything about private social media sites, and they didn't say anything about private companies being the arbiter and the deciders of how they're going to be doing verification. So there's still going to be a registry, just for basically every other service you use other than something directly government related. Now, I think that the only avenue to this, the only fix to this, is leaving the internet alone, the way that it's always supposed to have been, a free final bastion of freedom, and putting the entire blame and the responsibility on the people producing the fucking children that are accessing the internet. If you're a parent, it is up to you to parent your fucking child. It is not up to the government to come into my fucking life and tell me because you dipshits can't take care of your fucking kids that my internet freedoms are limited. Now, the problem is when they talk about this being for the kids, I'll show you a quick poll, for instance. This is a poll where people in Canada, for instance, support the ban of social media for anybody under 16. So you can see that a vast majority, 75% in this case, over 70%, think that, oh, hell yeah, it's fucking great. And obviously, as you talk to children, the number grows where the children are like, actually, we don't really want our internet access to be removed. Like, please, can you stop? The reality is, the arguments that they raise are things like, hey, what if kids are exposed to misinformation, cyberbullying, explicit content, negative mental health impacts, addiction? Yes, there are actual problems, and to be honest with you, these are real concerns, and that's why I wanted to talk about this with some very serious nuance. Yes, these are all actual issues. And again, the kids who are accessing the internet and seeing this kind of stuff need to have themselves be monitored by their parents. Parents need to sit down and talk to their kids about how much they use their phones, how much screen time they provide, because the argument of social media being addictive is kind of half true because, yes, a lot of these companies like Facebook have been exposed with developing new technologies to psychologically, addict children into like scrolling their feeds. But addiction is one of those things where look, anything can be fucking addictive, right? Like playing a video game, for instance, is very addictive to some people. Some people play video games fucking 16 hours a day. Should we as the government decide, okay, let's just put like a national time lock on every video game so everyone only has like 4 hours of game time a day to prevent addiction, right? Should we, like, there's so many aspects to this that you kind of look at and think, at what point does personal fucking accountability actually matter? When does it actually start mattering in this entire story? So to kind of look into this too, one of the reasons why I talk about why the internet like surveillance situation is actually quite terrible is because I have seen in my life, and I've not lived a very long life by the way, I have seen in my life that the internet and when it comes to mass surveillance is usually used to just monitor and keep people down. For instance, this is a totally separate situation, kind of. But back when I was younger and I got my first car, I had to get car insurance. Obviously, you can't buy a car without car insurance. Now, obviously, when you're when you're shopping for car insurance, it's a matter of who's gonna fuck me the hardest. Okay, so you find the one that's the nice, somebody that kisses you on the cheek a little bit before they totally screw you. So I went with one car insurance company, and they said, "Listen, you can save 15% a month if you download this app and run it 24/7." Now, at the time, 15% was a fair bit for me, okay? It was like, hey, I can use that to buy groceries. I can use that to pay another bill and whatnot. So I was like, sure, I downloaded an app on my phone, and it monitored my location basically every minute. So anytime I drove my car, it monitored how fast I was going. It monitored how fast I was braking. It monitored every single aspect. It checked exactly where I went to from point A to point B. Now, at the time, I was like, it's invasive, but I'm saving 15%. By the end of the month, I saved not even 1%. The bill was the same, except now this shitty company had my entire location mapped out. And the problem with this was that I don't know who they're sharing it with because their privacy policy was vague enough to allow it to share with anybody. And maybe they were using my location information to fuck me a bit on insurance because maybe I was braking my vehicle too hard. Maybe I was driving 10 kilometers faster in a zone, which everyone fucking does here in anywhere you drive, by the way. Maybe I was driving in off-peak hours, dangerous hours. It was like when I decided to go through with it, I was like, man, they really are just monitoring me and giving me no benefit and just screwing me over the most. When you give ChatGPT and these corporations your health records, who's to say those health records won't be used against you when you're reapplying or getting your insurance down the road, right? Especially in America where this kind of stuff is very fucking important, right? If you don't have good medical insurance or you give these insurance companies a reason to screw you over, it can financially block you the rest of your life. Now imagine in a future on the internet where accessing any social media site requires you to provide your identification. That basically de-anonymizes you on every single platform. And I think one of the creepiest things in life is having every aspect of your life be monitored, especially now that artificial intelligence is basically around. And so, you don't really even need a human agent to watch you. You can just feed everyone's conversation into an AI LLM and have it spit out somebody's entire profile, key things to take track of, and so on and so forth. I think making statements, right, and being allowed to freely speak is an important aspect of society. And I think free access to information is important. I'm not saying all minors should have access to illegal material or pornography, obviously not. But I think a minor having access to free information that the government doesn't arbitrarily get to decide is it mature or not is also important too. I think privately speaking to people is very important too, but also we'll get to that in a second. When you talk about information and surveillance, anytime these companies have you pegged and pinged, basically it means that you are going to be scared to actually speak your mind, right? If you can't privately, anonymously speak about the government, about things that you feel are wrong in society, is that really a future that you want to fucking live in, right? Like, I spent my entire time on the internet. I started reading creepypastas on YouTube, and I was reading scary, spooky internet stories that probably would be banned underneath today's social media laws because they'd be too distressing for children, right? I guess kids couldn't access a little bit of fucking video game spooky pastas. But then I started looking on the dark web. I started looking at darker internet mysteries. And the reality of it is that it was the freedom to look through that part of the internet, to explore the internet as it actually is, an unfettered last bastion of real human freedom. And, when you look at other countries like China, for instance, where the internet is very fucking regulated, what is somebody supposed to do when the government effectively controls every single fucking aspect of what you can post, what you can browse, and what you can do, right? Especially when they have everyone's shit locked down into a mass surveillance engine like this. In the future, one of the things that also freaks me out is we've already had the government push towards getting rid of things like encryption because, in their minds, only criminals or terrorists or bad people. Tony Soprano uses shit like encryption to protect his communications. But encryption is important because it prevents not just the government, but actual criminals from peeking into the communications you have with you and your friends, your family, your wife, your husband, your loved ones, your kids. Conversations that you want to have, knowing, at least with the peace of mind that the conversations you have with your loved ones can't just be read by any random person out there. The FBI, and I was looking at this too, they put in all this effort to de-encrypt things like signal messages lately, especially after the fact that they haven't even done fucking all to arrest really anybody in the Epstein class yet. These people and these politicians and these organizations are using the safety of children to push more mass surveillance, more control into your life. And unfortunately, people are fucking letting it happen. And I don't know what the fix around it is, man. Canada is the next country in line federally at this point to push for this kind of crap. And if it's not this political party, it's the other political. They're all fucking in on it, okay? You've got tons of bills being passed in the United States, and nobody's addressing the core key concern, is that people are throwing these children up as the sacrificial lamb to basically push for a very nefarious agenda. And look, I think I've talked about this whole situation for months now because I consider it to be so important. And the reason I consider it to be so important is, dude, I've spent 10 years making content on the internet. Hell, the content that I make is only ever possible because of a free, unfettered internet. The internet, when we are required to give up all of our identification and have every algorithm basically be controlled by the government, the foundations already laid, makes the next 10, 15 years that much more scarier. Every bit of data that we're going to get received in the future, I don't doubt, is going to be filtered through and delivered in a way where it's sanitized first and foremost by the elite that lead us. And I know it's conspiratorial to say that, but what other way is there than to not see it that way, Ladies and gentlemen, if you like what you saw, please like, comment, and subscribe. Dislike it if you dislike it. Remember to just keep fighting back, man. And you know what? Maybe the only last bastion here is like a video that I made a week and a half ago where I told you guys stop using Google, right? Where I showed you guys how to use your own meta search engine that was self-hosted. Maybe that is just the play now. Self-host your own social media, self-host your own communications platform, your own search engines, your own AI models, because the future is very much tied to a place where everything is centralized, everything is controlled, and people's access to information will just be controlled by a very few people, very few group who currently are at the top. Some of those people who have allegedly done some of the most horrific things with children and, women and men alike. And those people are the ones that get to decide for fucking you and me, right? Like, just wild, insane world we live in. I am out.